All right, so today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful and maybe surprising empires ever built in the Caribbean. Now, this is a story about luxury resorts, for sure. But what if I told you its foundation was built on something, well, way less glamorous? Let's dive in and really deconstruct the empire of the legendary Gordon Butch Stewart. Okay, when you hear the name Sandals, this is probably what pops into your head, right? A swim-up bar, that perfect, almost too perfect beach, and just pure, all-inclusive luxury. I mean, this is the image they've spent millions crafting. It is paradise, and it's been a wildly successful brand.
But what if that swim-up bar is just the tip of the iceberg? What if I told you that this entire hotel dynasty, it was all funded by a totally different business, something way less sexy, and that the real story here is about a kind of strategic control that reaches way, way beyond the walls of any resort? That's what we're getting into.
So the big question is, how did he build it? Well, the crazy part is, the whole blueprint was kind of hidden in plain sight. It was all built piece by piece, right in front of everybody.
Okay, here it is. This is the map of the empire, and you can see right away this was never just a hotel company, not even close. You've got these four main pillars. Hospitality, sandals and beaches, that's the part everyone sees. But look behind that. There's an industrial and retail arm, a huge automotive division, and get this, even a media arm with a major national newspaper. It's like a totally self-sustaining ecosystem.
So, the secret sauce, the master key to this whole thing, is a business term called vertical integration. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Butch Stewart wasn't just building hotels. He was building a whole system where his own companies would supply his other companies. Think about it. In the Caribbean, supply chains can be a nightmare. So being able to control everything from the air conditioners in the hotel rooms to the cars that pick you up at the airport, that wasn't just a smart strategy. It was a killer competitive advantage.
Which brings us to the cash engine. Because to really get how these glamorous, all-inclusive resorts came to be, we have to start with something, well, a lot more boring. We have to talk about air conditioners. Yep, this is the origin story, and this is where the money, all of it, really came from. The whole empire, everything we're talking about, it all started with this, 3,000 pounds. That's it. Back in 1968, that is all Butch Stewart had to get Appliance Traders Limited, or ATL, off the ground. We're not talking about millions in venture capital. We're talking about a few $1,000s he managed to scrape together as a salesman. And his early strategy? It was just a four-step masterclass in business. First, he mastered the art of sales. Then, he spotted a massive gap in the market. People in Jamaica desperately needed reliable air conditioning. So step 3, he went out and locked down the exclusive rights for a big brand. But the real genius move, the game changer, was the last step. He didn't just sell you the AC unit. He guaranteed fast, reliable service. And back then, nobody was doing that. It was unheard of. And right there, that's the core of the whole financial strategy. ATL became the cash cow. It was a high-margin, super steady business. So Stewart just took the consistent profits from selling these, boring but essential appliances, and he used that money to fund his huge, high-risk, high-reward gamble in the tourism industry. It was brilliant. One business was literally paying for the other to get off the ground. All right, so with that cash engine just humming along, Stewart could finally turn his attention to tourism, and he was about to create a whole new kind of luxury. Now, to be clear, he didn't invent the all-inclusive concept, but you could absolutely argue that he perfected it. He took it and aimed it right at the high-end luxury market. And the growth, wow, it was just explosive. Think about this. He buys his first rundown hotel in 1981. In just 10 years, he's already expanding outside of Jamaica. And then by 97, he launches a whole new brand, Beaches, specifically to grab the family market that the couples-only sandals resorts couldn't touch. This wasn't luck. This was aggressive, smart, strategic expansion. So how did he take over the market so fast? It came down to relentless innovation. You know the swim-up bar, the thing you see at pretty much every Caribbean resort now? That was a sandals first, way back in 1984. He took service to a whole new level by bringing in actual, professionally trained English butlers for the top-tier suites. And then, to go head-to-head with places like the Maldives, he poured millions into building the Caribbean's very first over-the-water bungalows. That one move let him charge insane premium rates, like over $2,000 a night. Okay, so all this growth created something else. Immense power. The kind of power that lets Stewart influence not just what you do on vacation, but entire national economies. And to use that power effectively, he knew he needed to control 3 key things: money, the media, and airlift. In other words, the planes that actually bring the tourists to the islands. And this is just staggering. In 1992, the Jamaican dollar was in a complete freefall. So what did Butch Stewart do? He personally stepped in. He started pumping $1 million a week of his own money into the country's banking system just to stabilize the currency. Just think about that. It was an incredible move that showed his personal wealth was so vast, it could actually influence his country's national monetary policy. He didn't stop at money, though. He also built tools to shape the public story. In 1993, he started his own newspaper, the Jamaica Observer, which shattered a media monopoly that had stood for 100 years. This gave him a direct, powerful voice on politics and business. And then later on, his group bought up Visual Vibe, a leading digital billboard company. That move meant they effectively controlled a massive chunk of the country's outdoor advertising space. But when you have that much influence, it's bound to create some friction. And a big source of that was taxes. It really boiled down to a simple question: where do you count the money? The island governments, they wanted to tax the full price that a guest paid for their vacation. Makes sense. But Sandals, using a pretty common setup for big global companies, said, hold on, local taxes should only apply to the money that's left over after our offshore booking and marketing companies take their cut. And that disagreement, it created this constant tension that was just baked right into the business model. But not every big bet paid off, not by a long shot. The biggest failure was probably Air Jamaica. I mean, the dream was incredible, to achieve total vertical integration by owning the planes that bring the guests to your hotels. Perfect, right? The reality, though, is that the airline industry is just brutal. After a decade of losing hundreds of millions of dollars, he had to sell it back to the government. It was this really clear, painful lesson about the limits of his whole strategy. So after Butch Stewart passed away in 2021, the massive empire he built entered a whole new chapter. His son, Adam Stewart, took the helm. And this is really the story of what you could call Sandals 2.0. And the sheer scale of the empire that was handed down, it's just immense. When you add up all the pieces, the hotels, the cars, the appliances, the media, a plausible estimate for the annual revenue is more than $2.5 billion. This isn't just a hotel chain. It's a massive, diversified machine. So what's the new strategy for Sandals 2.0? Well, it's all about evolution. First, they're pushing hard into hyper-luxury. We're talking things like private rooftop pools to compete with the best hotels anywhere in the world. Second, there's a huge $1 billion expansion plan with a big focus on growing the family-friendly beaches brand. And third, and this is really interesting, there's a shift they're calling island integration. They're actually starting to encourage guests to leave the resort and eat at local restaurants. It's a move that directly takes on one of the biggest criticisms of the all-inclusive model. So, when you look at it all, the Sandals empire is really a masterclass in vertical integration. It's this incredible, self-contained ecosystem that was born and bred in the Caribbean. But here's the final question, right? The travel world today is being taken over by these giant, publicly traded global corporations. So can this fiercely private, family-run empire really survive and thrive in the next generation? Or could the very things that made it so unique end up becoming its biggest challenge? That's the real test.